you are the student of Stoicism, and apparently the Stoics promoted egalitarianism. That's our subject for this talk. And so I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that. It seems to be core to Stoicism.
Right, there's a lot of talk throughout the text. If someone is to ask you whether you are an Athenian or Roman, instead answer you are a citizen of the world, talking about environment not having so much of an impact on you, but rather your virtues, your personal values, and what you aspire to be good. So rather than focusing on a personal identity, some sort of birthright, a birth identity, rather to think in a more egalitarian sense that you're sharing brotherhood with others, with other humans, and to treat others well because of that link that we have.
They even I was even reading that they were you were to consider fellow citizens and slaves equally.
Right, yes, there's a lot of talk about slaves in the text and some of how should you treat your slaves, because in that time it was a common practice. But some who even had slaves are saying, well, don't beat the slaves. Treat them. They're in your house. Invite them to the feast table, and they too are a brother. So it's interesting to hear from our perspective, but of course, a different society. They were just taking that as a given, and it wasn't like slavery in the American South, or so it seems throughout the text. I could be wrong of that. Of course, I don't have as much of a historical perspective on the text, but rather just thinking about the themes within them. Yes.
Well, historically, slavery in the U.S. South was chattel slavery, meaning you could be born into it and you were a slave for life. Whereas in antiquity, slaves were just the spoils of war, oftentimes, and you could, after so much time, you could become a citizen, even like in Rome. Um, so it wasn't as brutal as it was in the American South, and I'm sure other places.
Right, and Epictetus, from what I recall, one of the Stoic writers himself was a slave, so that comes up a little in the text, and there's a certain regard for that. But even from Marcus Aurelius, even from Seneca, some other writers I've been reading, yes, that there's this shared brotherhood, there's this shared humanity. So treat others well, be nice toward others, and share in this common community of humans.
So I was also one of the things that comes up a lot on you see it online and in in debates in real life is egalitarian um, the class struggle within a capitalist system and how can we reconcile the two.
Right, so there might be some conflict there in that some people who have a lot will not be as forgiving for those perhaps who have little, and they'll abuse power, they'll take advantage of people who have less, and the people who have less can't provide for themselves as well. Some people might be in extreme situations, poverty, homelessness, they don't have health care. There's a question of, oh, well, should I buy medicine or get the groceries? And yeah, I can see that there could be a lot of conflict there indeed, yes.
But there's
What the Stoic tradition is talking about is living in moderation and not really looking toward wealth as something that makes a better life. It's a question of, well, how are you going to use the money? What are you going to do with power if you should happen to acquire it? And there's a lot of talk of power, of money, corrupting people, that people not really being mindful, not using things well, and falling into a trap of wanting more and more and more, never being satisfied.
so is there a takeaway from that for our current society, our consumer society?
Yes, there's a lot of pressure, perhaps, or a lot of messages that are sent in that, oh, well, if you have more things, you're going to enjoy life more. Buy that brand new car, buy that brand new house, have this big family. This is what you need to be successful, and buy these clothes, buy this makeup, buy this jewelry. And some people place a lot of value on that, but the Stoics are advocating for a more modest lifestyle and not valuing these things as much as our personal virtues, as finding purpose in life regardless of external possessions, regardless of our status in society, regardless of our environment. There's even talk in the text of, well, I will play a role. If you bring on poverty, well, I will be a good actor in that. If I should be in the military, well, I will be a good actor there too. And that a lot of things are outside of our control, they talk about. And how are we going to deal with these situations? Rather than complaining, rather than being miserable, we just have to make do with what happens and change that which we could. It's an interesting thing of thinking what's inside and what's outside of our control and how we're to respond to that appropriately.
It's has something to do with personal responsibility. Personal responsibilities for your actions, for what you can control in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it can be easy to blame others and to blame the world for certain circumstances that can happen, rather than working on yourself, rather than taking action, rather than trying to change things you can. It sometimes can be difficult to determine what's in your power, and surely because of a lot of accidents, because of a lot of chance, because of a lot of fortune, however you're to phrase it, well, people might be born with a certain disability. People might come across some really grievous circumstances. Perhaps they're a victim of trauma. Perhaps they've been in some terrible situations in life that really they couldn't do much about, and that can put people at a sort of disadvantage. It can be harder for them to be resilient. But the Stoic wisdom is that whatever circumstances should befall us, we can work on building our character and handling adversity well, and still living a good life.
So now I think that dovetails with the debate over equality of outcome and equality of opportunity. And what are your thoughts on both concepts?
Right. So the Stoic perspective might be that, well, we're not always going to have the outcomes that we want, and that society isn't going to, say, give us that really good hand in life. But how are we to adjust to that? How are we going to respond to that which happens around us? That surely where we're not going to have the same percentages of outcomes. We're not going to have all sorts of different people represented in every sort of life. Maybe in modern society, maybe we just see that certain people have preferences, that certain people don't have certain opportunities. Maybe people aren't interested in certain fields and certain work. And in the education profession, it seems to be that elementary school teachers are overwhelmingly women. And it seems that in construction work, the people who are in that are overwhelmingly men. So what are we to do about that? Are we to say that there is some sort of inequality? Well, there might be, but just because there happens to be a different percentage of people represented in certain fields doesn't mean that some people are being driven out, or that there's some sort of unfair circumstances that are happening. It could be a difficult thing to figure out, but I think that preferences are definitely different between men and women. Certain people are drawn to different things. Maybe some opportunity has brought people into different fields. There are a lot of things to consider. I don't think it's such an easy thing to say, oh, well, there's not a representative portion of some characteristic or some population or some identity, so therefore there's discrimination.
Anything you wanted to talk about?
Well, there's also a thing, too, of evaluating your own skills and your own strengths and what you can do. Surely not everyone is going to be able to be, say, an Olympic swimmer. Some might say, well, whatever you dream, put your hard work in and you could do whatever you want. Well, I think that can have some merit, but I don't think that can always be the case, because there are certain characteristics that limit us. For instance, basketball players tend to be pretty tall and have a certain physique. If you're born and you're really small, your body size isn't appropriate for something, well, maybe you won't be that star basketball player. Maybe that won't be something you'll be able to do. Maybe you can take up basketball as a hobby and enjoy it, maybe follow the sport, but you won't quite be in the NBA. So it's important to realize your own strengths and what you can do. How can you contribute to society? What kind of role can you play, and work toward that? Work toward having certain goals that are achievable, that are measurable, that are reasonable, and appreciate that which you do have rather than complaining about what you don't. Maybe we can work toward a certain thing and change ourselves and find the role we want to play, but unfortunately we're not going to be able to do it all. We're going to have to make some concessions. We're going to have to be realistic about ourselves.
Yeah, that came up in a conversation where I was corrected. I was trying to talk about that in careers and job opportunities that, I've worked places where there's someone in the work environment that's just stupid, and it was the word stupid that got me, the word police out. And what I meant to say was they were, less intelligent. They were almost at like the intelligence of like a 5-year-old, and they were functioning, but they weren't going to advance up the ladder into management or become an accountant. So that person's ability, their fit, while physically fit and strong, mentally wasn't able to get very far in the company I work for. But what I countered that with is something what you just said is the simplest version of it. Like when you walk into a room, there's the shortest person, the tallest person, the skinniest person, the heaviest person, and that's just the way life is. There are people that, like you said, with the Olympic swimmers, not everybody's cut out to be a sumo wrestler or an Olympic swimmer, and therefore there's going to be people who achieve much more than others in certain fields or certain parts of life than others.
Yeah, and even in the Stoic text, there's a chapter in Epictetus's work called the Cynic Calling, talking about certain people who would have a more aesthetic lifestyle, that they found that their role in life was going around and questioning people's values, their ideas, and really having nothing more than a walking stick and a cloak, whereas Stoics might be of a more moderate thing of living simply, having a frugal lifestyle, but not being so much the extreme as that, is just having little to no possessions. And they're saying, well, that can be a hard calling. That could be something that might not fit your personality. Everybody's not going to be cut out for that. Certain people will fulfill certain roles in society. You'll be good at certain things, and maybe it can be good to have a sort of self-evaluation, maybe get some feedback from others and see, well, what can you be good at? What kind of job, what kind of work can you pursue that could be good for your personality, your strengths? And maybe we can cultivate those strengths and characters, but in some cases, you're just not going to do certain things, and that's okay. Not everyone can do everything. We're going to have to settle at some point, like I said. And maybe in high school there's a lack of that, where students don't get as much career counseling or career advice to see, well, where can you fit in? Maybe it's more of, oh, we'll just go to college and find out what you want to do there, and if there's a class you liked, we'll go ahead and major in that. But are people really putting consideration into what they're signing up for? I don't think that's often the case, and that's a disturbing trend right there, if you will.
Yeah. Well, that it just it comes like you said about when you're mentioning about blaming, and there's egalitarianism is something I think that's kind of comes naturally to human beings. We want to be treated equal ourselves, and so we want others to be treated equal, and yet there's trains of thoughts. There's philosophies, there's subject matter recently in the last so many years that have come up where can you hear me now? Okay. So there's been in recent years there's talk of some people are more equal than others, and I don't I anyway, I know that it could be the
Okay. Well, it's a question of, well, what do people mean by equality, and getting a definition of that. As you said earlier, there's a question of equality of opportunity, equality of outcome. Well, yeah, you ask them, what is that going to be? What does it even mean to have this equality? Are people afforded with the same opportunities Well, maybe not so much. Perhaps the person who was born into a wealthy family and their parents paid for them to go to school and get specialized training, and maybe they have more opportunities than people with less money might. I mean, so what are you going to do about that? Are you going to take away those those advantages that certain people have? I don't think that that's realistic. How are you going to enforce that? I don't think that people would be advocating for a position like that. There's some sci-fi work. It's Harrison Bergeron is a story where people had to meet with this handicapper general that if anyone had any sort of advantage over someone else, that let's break their legs or let's cover their faces if they happen to be more attractive to certain people, so that everyone in society would be equal. So that the person who can run really fast, well, let's put weight on their legs so they can't do that. Oh, the dancer, oh, well, let's stop them from doing that. I mean, are we going to go to that extreme? Again, I don't think people are advocating for that, but that might be the logical outcome of this search for equality. Instead, maybe a more realistic thing could be, well, treat others with care and compassion. Allow people to apply for different positions, maybe create opportunities for people to learn certain skills. I mean, there's a talk about women not being much in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Well, there are programs popping up where people can attend a week-long camp or a weekend camp or some certain events, or being drawn to certain career paths and being exposed to certain role models. Well, these are positive things maybe toward getting some more people involved in certain programs. But just sitting back and complaining and saying, oh, well, the system's against us, the system's rigged, the patriarchy, whatever else, that doesn't seem to be very productive. To identify, well, what is the problem? What can we do to change that? And not really blaming or being nasty toward others in the process. And that's something I see from many of these people that are termed the social justice warrior, that they're demanding this respect. They want to be treated kindly, but they're treating other people in a very nasty way and inferring these motives and thinking that other people are malicious rather than actually having a conversation with them and trying to get at what common ground there might be.
Well, I see it as, I've never been wealthy, and it's always attractive to think about, the redistribution of wealth. Well, maybe if the people at the top would redistribute their wealth, I'd have a lot more. That would be great. But then if you take 5 minutes to think it through, it's ridiculous. And it also means that it could also mean that even though I have very little, I would have to give to people that have nothing, and having very little would be having a lot less. But the issues that you just brought up, where we have the patriarchy and responsible for everyone's failures. The solutions are very similar to redistribution, because I've been watching videos and reading articles about handicapping people that have all these privileges so that other people can do well. And until we have a society that's truly equal, then we have to give less opportunities to, say, white males and the patriarchy.
Oh, so that in some cases discrimination too. That if we're going to have, well, okay, we need a certain percentage of people to fulfill these job requirements, or we have to have a certain percentage of women, a certain percentage of Latinos. I mean, where are we going to end? How many categories are we going to have? And then what happens if people really don't apply? And what happens if people do apply but they don't have the skill set? Then we might have people in the workforce who really aren't able to do the job. Isn't the first consideration anyway, well, you meet the job qualifications, so we're going to hire you. We think that you can perform the job regardless of whether you happen to be a single mom, whether you happen to be born of a certain country. There's a lot of talk about that. There's an equal opportunity in employment, that you're not going to list your age on your resume or any of these identifying factors, and that's not going to be considered in the interview. So if we're going to say, oh, well, we're going to hire this certain group over another group, well, that seems to be against that philosophy there.
Well, I made a video recently, several weeks ago, about New York school system dropping the requirement for literacy, and I think it was reading and writing skills for potential prospective teachers, and we're at the point of ridiculous now, because minorities are affected because they're expected to have the same standards as non-minorities, and so they had to drop the standards. I haven't followed up on where they are with that yet. But at the same time, I found that in New York City that the reading and comprehension has gone up during that time, meaning they were doing something right before they enacted those changes.
Yeah, and maybe they're just deeper problems anyway, and that you're talking about redistributing money and this access for people to have, and maybe it's lack of parenting, maybe it's people just having too many kids, not having sex education, not having birth control. There's a lot of things. All of these kids coming about, a lot of one-parent households, kids that really don't seem to have opportunities. So maybe there's some personal responsibility in that rather than, I just want to have a kid and the government's going to take care of me. Don't worry about it. We have a push for male birth control coming, so maybe that will help things along, and just more access to sex education and birth control for women as well. So yeah, they're just complicated issues. It's not going to be so simple as, oh, well, we're going to change this one little thing and all of a sudden it's going to be better. Society is going to be a better place. It's difficult.
There's a lot of negative talk in recent years, and if you follow Noam Chomsky, and he's constantly attacking just about everybody, but he does admit that in the United States it's the best, most equal, freest society there's ever been, and that's how I see it, as seeing the changes. That the first part of this video, I briefly went through all the changes that in the last 150 years in this country, and it's completely night and day, where much more than half the people in the country couldn't vote, and I think we have in place laws to protect just about everybody. It's not extremely specific, narrowing down to like point something percent of the population. There still are people that aren't covered, but in general, everybody is equal, and everybody has the same opportunity in the United States, and in Europe and Canada, and a lot of other places.
Right, or at least we're moving toward that. And people with disabilities, I've worked with students with disabilities who are transitioning to the workforce. And some of the ideas before is, oh, well, we're just going to put these people into institutions, or they're just going to stay home for their lives and really not be involved in the community. And organizations are popping up saying, okay, well, we want inclusion, so what are we going to do? We're going to teach these adult learners job skills. We're going to get them involved with volunteering. We're going to get them involved in mainstream work. And there was even an idea years ago about sheltered workshops, where it would be only people with disabilities in this workplace, and they would be paid a sub-minimum wage, maybe like a $2 an hour thing for, say, packing boxes in a warehouse or cleaning jobs. And this is even being seen as something that's really negative, and that it's not community inclusion. It's not really allowing people to progress, that you're just kind of stuck in this rut, and there's not really much going on with that. So there's some progress there, and these are positive things, rather than saying, oh, well, society hates people with disabilities, rather than saying, oh, these people aren't afforded the opportunity. Well, there are organizations popping up saying, okay, we're going to do something about this. We're going to do something positive. And we're going to try to change societal perception, employers' perception, and do something here to fix the problem. So that's something pretty positive, I think. That's a reason.
And a lot of us have gone through this. I went through this for years, where I always blamed an employer, blamed a coworker, blamed a neighbor for problems I was having, and I found that my life took a complete turnaround when every issue that came up, every negative issue came up. I said, well, what could I have done better? What did I do wrong? And it was a complete change of outlook for life, rather than harboring resentment towards other people for screwing you over and making your life miserable. You'll find that no matter where you are, every job, there's going to be people that are going to make your job not as enjoyable. There's going to be neighbors that are going to be bickering with you. There's going to be people that are going to throw obstacles in your way, and it's how we handle it, the decisions we make. And I think it's kind of like a a liberating thing when you take on your own responsibility for your own actions. I mean, if somebody comes up and shoots you with a gun, you can't blame yourself. But it's a two-way street when when you're at work and negotiating, or in social life negotiating with other people. What you do, your actions can have consequences for your future.
Right, and in the Stoic text, there's a lot of talk about dealing with difficult people and accepting the fact that other people are going to be adversarial, that other people are going to, as you said, pose certain barriers. They're going to give you a hard time, but how are we going to react to the situations? Well, first, there's going to be an acceptance of the fact that other people are going to be nasty, and to not just jump to the wildest conclusions. There's talk in the text of describing certain behaviors rather than attributing certain labels to behaviors, rather than saying that a person bathes badly, for some instance, but rather just describe what the person is doing. I mean, who knows? Maybe the person just has a different perspective on looking at things. Maybe they're really creatures of habit, and if you break from that they're going to lash out. I don't know. We can't really know the motivations of others in many cases. So even if someone is going to give us a hard time, well, how are we going to respond to that? We can acknowledge that maybe the people lack certain wisdom, that they're not reflecting on their situation really well. They're not handling anger really well. They're lashing out at others. Okay, so what are we going to do about that? How are we going to move on? Hopefully we're not dragged down by others and put into a sort of depressive state and thinking that, well, I'm no good. It's all my fault. So yes, there could be an element that we have to acknowledge we could have done something better. Maybe we could react to a situation differently. Maybe we could have proposed some sort of compromise. I don't know. It's difficult. We have to look at individual situations and, yes, work on improving ourselves and taking some responsibility where it's appropriate. It could be difficult to tell, though, how much influence we have in a certain situation or what we could have changed, if anything.
How does that fit in with the Stoic view of determinism in life?
Oh, well, there's talk in the text about human nature having a certain role, that we might have some sort of impulses or desires, and to be reflective on that maybe we can't change certain things about ourselves, but we can reduce the presence of certain behaviors, that maybe we can be mindful of something that's going on and not react so poorly. So there's an interplay here of mindfulness and nature, that maybe we can't change the fact that we're going to be nervous before giving a speech, for instance. But if we really think about that and reflect upon that, think about our emotions, thinking about what we're feeling and preparing for certain circumstances that might be causing us some sort of challenge, that look at the challenges as maybe a positive thing, look at them as something to overcome rather than something that's going to really destroy us. There's an element of chance, there's an element of nature and what's outside of our control to distinguish what we can control and how we're going to respond to that.
You and I are both secular, we're both non-religious, and I don't remember where, but somebody somewhere had I think in the comments on your video or something about Stoicism, commented, it's not, might have been on one of the social media sites, it's not, Stoicism is not commensurate with secularism. What do you say about that?
Oh, right. So I've done a video on that yes, there are some ideas within the Stoic tradition about the soul, about a divine providence or a creator. Well, yes, some of these ideas indeed were present in the Stoic text, but just because they're there doesn't mean we have to take everything from a tradition and endorse it 100%, or otherwise we're not a real Stoic or we're not practicing it well. Well, there are going to be things from all different traditions that have value, some things that are good, some things that are bad, and maybe it's the case that because people were in a different time, that their knowledge was limited. Perhaps if, Seneca, Epictetus were alive today, they'd have some different perspectives on things, maybe with some sort of scientific advancements, some new technology that we have, input of other philosophers, that maybe some of their ideas are different. And I'm okay with that. It's a good thing. And there's a lot of talk in the Stoic text about being open-minded, being willing to change our ideas given new arguments, given new reason, given new evidence, that we're not going to be so foolhardy about things just to hold a position and never budge from it, that we're to follow nature as they talk about. You see, seeing what's around us and having an accurate view of the world rather than just saying, oh, well, so-and-so said so, so I'm going to go with it. And, you know, there are some challenging passages within the Stoic text, and maybe I can't endorse 100%. Maybe things are a little bit different now than they were in ancient Greece or Rome, and that's okay. It's information that's presented, and do with it what you will.
I tend to see when people talk about the grandeur of art in like the Middle Ages, of the cathedrals made, and what I always think of, and I've always thought of, is that it wasn't a really good career decision to come out as an atheist 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, and so no matter whatever you did, and certain times in history, you know, if you weren't part of, you know, I mean, the church in, you know, for about 1,000 years in Europe was probably the major employer, that, or the, you know, the lords of the castle or the king. So it wasn't always a really smart thing to come out and be against what everybody believes. Although atheism goes back thousands of years, non-believers, but it's I always have to take that with when I think about the great minds in the past, many of them being religious, have to think, well, they probably didn't have a choice.
Right. And as you said in the text, there's some talks of slavery and how we're to treat slaves. So clearly they're not getting all things right. And even there are talks about certain animals, and about animals being here to feed us, things like that, but not much of a concern for the welfare of animals, as maybe they didn't have that information of animals being able to feel pain, and some concerns about animal suffering that we might have today. And that's okay. As you mentioned earlier, societal progress is a thing, that we're moving in a positive direction, it seems. And surely there's going to be some work for improvement. Of course, we're working toward those things, and there's going to be some going forward, there's going to be some going back, as it's not an easy thing, that people are going to be resistant to a changing of the status quo. Just look at issue like gay marriage, for instance, right? I mean, there was a lot of opposition to that. It's a decade ago, maybe even like 5 years ago, but the societal views on that have changed. Politicians have come out and changed their position on that, and the law changes. Society moves.
That's one subject that I think hit the United States by storm, and I didn't see the acceptance for equality for all, marriage equality, as I like to put it, happening so quickly, and it just came in like a locomotive. Whereas most rights are earned, or people gain more rights over. It's a slow incremental process over decades or centuries, and that one just bang.
So there are some positive changes, and perhaps we could be grateful for that, and maybe it's the case that certain people, certain identities, like you said, maybe they wouldn't want to come out because of that. They wouldn't want to share their ideas openly, that if we were in a different place, in a different time, that circumstances might be so much different, and we wouldn't be as free to express ourselves. We wouldn't be as free to discuss certain ideas. Maybe if we were living in a different country, even today, you see these stories about bloggers being killed in Bangladesh and certain countries, that these people have to stay under. And I know you even use an anonymous handle as well. As there's some of those worries today that maybe what we would say would come back and bite us, our employer positions that we might have. And unfortunately, we see this disturbing trend online, but we're working toward that, and we're still able to discuss our ideas, even if we're behind some sort of pseudonym or handle, and that's all right as well.
Yeah, that's that's amazing that we can do that. And
Yeah, we have the technology, and yeah, maybe hundreds of years ago, well, how much influence can a person really have, and what kind of platforms do they have to express their ideas? They don't really have that. So now, all of these people, they have their blogs, they have their YouTube channels and podcasts, and there's a lot of information and ideas out there. So go ahead, you think your perspective is right, we'll put it out there, and people will likely hear what you have to say. Of course, there are tons and tons of voices, so it's up to us to determine what the good information is. But yes, we have that platform of the internet. We could connect with so many people, so that's something to be grateful for as well.
yeah, we do. We do have a multitude of sources to get news and opinion, whereas just a few decades ago, it was the major newspapers and the television stations. I'm starting to hear some hissing sound. Do you hear that? Okay, it stopped. So we have so much more available. We have I think Daniel Dennett has credited the internet for the spread of secularism because people are no longer stuck in their village and have to wait for other people to tell them what's going on or wait for the 11 o'clock news. And now we can find out what's going on 24/7 everywhere in the world.
Right.
Um,
It's an interesting thing. There's some controversy recently about certain speakers at college campuses and some protests and violence surrounding those. Ann Coulter was a recent example. Even the ACLU came out and they were saying, well, we should have free exchange of ideas. That even if you consider certain views hateful, well, okay, they have a platform. They were invited to speak at a college, and what should their response be? More speech. Okay, instead of shutting people down, instead of being violent, and perhaps people can view certain words as violence, as we've been seeing. I think that's another dangerous way to go about things, because if words are violence, then if words are violence, are people violent? And should we assault those people and shut them down? And do they deserve basic rights and decency? We can have passionate disagreement for sure, but what could the response be? Well, let's just put out information contrary to that. It was interesting, and years ago, there were some creationists who were going about on college campuses handing out creationist literature, and there was some addendum to the Origin of Species that was passed out, and there were creationists giving these presentations, going on college campuses, so secular groups, scientific groups, were saying, okay, well, if they're going to do this, then we're going to have events of our own. And I think that's a great way to respond. But unfortunately today, the response from some groups at least is, well, we're going to block people from these events. We're going to shout speakers down. We're going to disrupt. We're going to pull fire alarms. And this seems very illiberal. People who are saying, well, we want this diversity of ideas. We want compassion. We want respect. If they're going to treat others with disrespect, I don't see that that's a positive way to go forward, even if those individuals are being disrespectful. If you think that they have some terrible ideas, well, okay, let's just respond with more speech instead of violence.
the problem with that whole subject is who's the judge of who gets to speak and who doesn't get to speak. And the problem is that when we talk about the progress in equality and egalitarianism in our society, it's made because all of the major institutions, all the wrongs that we've righted are because somebody was heard somewhere. And so it's the people that are in the quote unquote marginalized groups that want to stop people they disagree with from talking, but it's they that will be hurt by this eventually, because the people in power are not going to agree to give up their power unless they're convinced through whatever means, popular means, economic means. And if they can shut it down because that's the way we do things, then it's going to come back and hurt everybody, I think.
Right. It's an interesting thing that's similar to that's happening in politics today, that people are calling for less government power, less executive orders now that President Trump is in power, right? They're saying, oh, well, now we don't want him doing these things. We should have a smaller government, that the president shouldn't have as much power. I say, well, wait a second. 8 years ago, you were quite enthusiastic when there was a lot of government intervention on things, when President Obama was issuing executive orders. But now when a different person's in power and things are happening that you don't like, well, then you start to question those things and see that when certain circumstances change, well, do you want to be on the other end of that, right? So it's really something to consider there. So having more moderation and not being shut down like that. Yeah, that's important to get the ideas out there.
So before we wrap this up, do you want to? Is there anything else you want to say, or um,
Yeah, to retouch on gratitude, yes, there can be some circumstances that we could be in, some sort of opportunity that we don't have, some sort of character deficiencies, some sort of disadvantages that we have, but to be grateful for the positive things that are going on rather than focusing on so much of the negative, I think is something that's really beneficial. So to say, oh, well, there are all these wrong things in society, there are all these things I don't like, okay, so be it. But what are the good things that are going on? How can we positively contribute to the world? I think it's important to focus on that, to have a sense of gratitude.
do you think that the people that are at different ends of the political and social spectrum um, should be working together more? They're finding common ground.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, as there can be some issues in which there's common ground, but we have to be careful in some ways. And you hear about this phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but not so much the case. If someone is endorsing certain perspectives, treating others really terribly, well, maybe we don't want to ally with those individuals. Then now we see that many people from the right have spoken up in favor of free speech, in favor of certain liberal values. Perhaps there can be some disagreements, for instance, on issues like abortion, issues like gun control, the death penalty, but there can be agreement on other issues. So maybe we could agree, maybe there can be some sense of working together, but just to be careful on who we're aligning with and where we're promoting certain individuals. It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to consider and what we are to do. But yeah, there can indeed be some common ground. And rather than vilifying everyone, rather than saying, oh, you have to fall in lockstep 100%, well, expose yourself to different views and understand why people think the way they do, where they're coming from. There was an unfortunate clip from the Young Turks. There was Anna Kasparian was lamenting women who voted for Donald Trump and was being very nasty toward them and calling them effing stupid, dumb, they don't care about women, stuff like that. And it's not really considering where the people are coming from, but rather just bashing them. And is that actually going to lead towards something productive, similar to Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail calling people deplorables? That didn't really seem to work so well either. And in fact, many who were Trump supporters were wearing T-shirts that say "I am a deplorable," and they took that and just were laughing about it. And it was just furthering this idea that people on the left are being intolerant toward those on the right, toward people who don't agree with them.
Well, yeah, I see that whole the 2016 presidential election as a reaction to political correctness out of control. There's people that and this started showing up on cable news networks where they were the talking heads were saying, the average person is tired of the intellectual or the educated person telling them how to think and how to talk. But one thing about having there's one you brought up, like abortion, reproductive rights, is both sides of that issue are so entrenched that I don't see any resolution in any near future in my lifetime. It could happen, but the one thing there is a commonality though, and when you take something that extreme and you say, well, we both sides cherish life, and their intentions are probably good on both sides. You can't speak for every person, but in general, and so there is a place we can meet. We can meet halfway at a halfway point with other people, and we saw that with the Democrats in the '90s with Clinton saying, well, we want abortion to be rare, and So
Was it rare, safe, and
and something,
yeah.
yeah, rare. But so that's but both sides are so entrenched you can't even, that wasn't even a common ground. But there is a common ground. Like I said, we all sides cherish life. Just about everyone does. You cherish your own at least, and so there is a starting point for every, no matter how divided, how entrenched the sides are.
Yeah, and you never know people who turn around, who change their position or become more moderate in their positions. I mean, people, to cite really extreme examples, the Westboro Baptist Church, well, people have left that, and now they're actually pretty active in secular circles, that they've moved away from some of those extreme positions, and now they're out there campaigning for the rights of LGBT individuals.
Yes,
That they're
the
speaking at atheist conventions. It was Nathan Phelps,
yes.
Megan Phelps Roper recently gave a TED talk, and she's talking about this issue that she seemed it was that people treated her nice, and she was treated her with respect, and she was more likely to listen to what they had to say rather than just people who are being nasty toward her, and that led her in a positive direction. So she is encouraging some more reasoned, reflective discussion to happen. So yeah, people do change their positions. Of course, not everyone's going to, and the change might not happen overnight, but putting that information out there, you really never know. And surely we've made many changes in our lives, right?
Oh,
We've
sure.
changed positions over time. We get new information. We meet new people. We have different experiences. And that's a good thing if we're getting closer to the truth and we're changing our ideas based on good reasons and doing that.
So it was nice having this discussion with you, Justin. And would you do you want to talk about where we can find you on the internet?
Yep, you can go to my website at justinvacula.com where you will find links to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social networks.
And YouTube, you have a series of Stoic discussions or talks or readings.
Yep, that's right. I have about 35 videos at the moment talking about all sorts of different topics on gratitude and handling adversity, on the shortness of life was a recent video that I uploaded. All sorts of different conversations that should have some practical influence on life, tackling many perennial topics that people are considering and how to live a good life.
Well, it was nice. It was really nice talking to you. I watched the and made a follow up on Dean Esme. Is that his
Oh,
name?
yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that was I was cringing, not at you, at him. And then I he's got an awful lot of time in the movie The Red Pill.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting change of things, that's for sure. Yeah. I was hoping for some productive discussion there, but there was just a lot of shouting from him and name calling, and that was quite unfortunate. But I think a lot of people came away from that video and seeing that his behavior wasn't so great, and he just didn't give himself a good impression there, I don't think. No.
No, he came out of the gate swinging, and he had, like Ben Affleck on the Bill Maher show with Sam Harris, that everybody thought he had an agenda going into the show to go after
Yeah,
Sam
yeah.
Harris. So it doesn't. I don't think it makes you look good when you go in with the, with the aim to fight rather than to have it. And I got the impression that it was to be a dialogue, and
Right, right.
and it wasn't. I don't think it was really fruitful, other than, like you said, to show that some tactics aren't really a really good approach to meeting halfway with people and trying to understand.
Right, right. Yeah, that anger really isn't going to be a productive thing in that case. Yeah, sure, we can be angry, we can have some sort of sense of injustice about things, but yeah, how are we going to be productive with that anger? How are we going to have conversations with people we disagree with? Well, yelling at them and calling them names and attributing malice isn't a good way to go about things.
No, it certainly doesn't. It doesn't get my attention. So it gets people's back up against the wall, and they become more intractable. Or you tune somebody out that's attacking you personally. So it's not. I don't think it's a really productive approach. And we saw that with the accusations after the last year's election, presidential election, that all white people, are this and that misogynist, and the white women are the ones that got Trump voted in, and just insulting people. And it's not a way, if they're so angry, that's not going to get people back in their camp by insulting them.
Right. They've internalized misogyny, that they hate women, that they're not voting in the interests of women. And though there was even a lot of attacks on Bernie Sanders supporters, this term Bernie bro, in that a lot of the opposition to Hillary Clinton was based on sexism. And surely, I mean, of course, there's going to be an element of that, but that neglects to focus on why people didn't like Hillary, that people really thought that she had an honesty issue, that people couldn't trust her, that the campaign wasn't run very well, that she didn't have an appeal to voters, and that she was a political insider were just some objections that people had to her. So Trump, I think, was successfully able to appeal to populism and things that people wanted to hear, and promises that people thought were going to come to fruition. And he got in. They say, like, one of the easiest opponents that Hillary might have had, and they blew it.
Right. Well, that's I think a lot of people were blown away by that. But anyway, so it was great talking about egalitarianism with you, and so we have to end it sometime. And I think this is a good time.
All right.
Oh, okay.
I'll chat with you later.
Okay, great.
All right. Thanks for the time.
All right. Thank you. Bye.